Generally speaking, a lot of company founders, CEOs, they really don't want to hire a lot of people today. Generally, just across sales and different functions, you want to be lean and mean. And the metric that people typically look at today, the smartest founders in the world, is looking at revenue per employee. They're looking to keep the headcount low. They're looking at ways of essentially not hiring people. They, by default, thinking about, can an AI agent solve that problem? Can a piece of automation solve that problem?
Welcome to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand with Nicholas Kuhne. So I'd like you to meet Frank Sondors, founder of Salesforge. So as a father of two, he brings his A game, not just at home, but in the digital world too. More than just a strategist, he's a doer, the kind of guy who makes things happen, whether it's for his family or for his clients. He thrives on tackling challenges in predictive and marketing intelligence, demand generation, monetization, precision marketing and sales, coaching and sales strategy, revenue operations, and obviously starting a fantastic business and scaling it. Driven by performance, commitment, competence, and culture, he doesn't just compete, he outsmarts. His professional hobby, crushing the competition through unconventional tactics. So, with that introduction, hi, Frank.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Okay. So we're going to be talking a little bit about Salesforge today. And we're going to be talking about some of the challenges and experiences you've had in scaling the startup over the last 20 or so months, taking it from 0 to over 3 million in ARR. And growing your team as well from 3 co-founders to 34 team members. I mean, in such a short period of time, especially in Europe, that is quite a feat. So we're very interested to hear a little bit about that. But my first question is, where in the world are you?
So today, this week in particular, I'm visiting a conference in Latvia called Tech Chill. It's the #1 conference, and we have done a bunch of conferences, not just in Europe, but also in the US, to connect with different startups, the community. We do hire predominantly people in Europe to ensure that you do have some sort of presence in different parts of Europe. You want to do what's called employer branding. So really, we're here just to do a bit of employer branding because we do hire a bunch of people in this part of the world.
I knew you in Riga, actually, because I saw some of the posts that you did and that your keynote went really well. And I'm in Riga every 3 months anyway to go to the spas and things like that. So I would absolutely recommend Riga to anybody. So the first thing I want to ask actually is, what is an AI?
That's a very good question. So it's a new thing, or sort of a new thing that sort of popped up maybe about 6 to 12 months ago. And so everybody knows what a typical SDR is, so sales development rep. It's a human that you hire to build a pipeline for your organization. And typically, pipeline means you book meetings, and these meetings are typically closed by what's called an account exec. And that's a typical thing that happens in the world of SaaS, so software as a service. So now, because of all the AI stuff, ChatGPT, large language models, AI agents, etc., a lot of companies started to build what's called an AI SDR. Essentially, it's a fully autonomous capability that is able to build essentially that sales pipeline for you. So like a sales rep used to do that, manually crafting emails, making sure they're converting the prospects, and then making sure they're booking the meetings into the calendar of the AEs, so account execs. That, to an extent, can be fully autonomous as an experience. That means you don't have to hire as many SDRs in your organization. A lot of people say, oh, it's looking to replace the jobs, but that's not really the case. You cannot fully replace an SDR in an organization. And the reason for that is because what a typical SDR does, it would engage with a prospect either through inbound or outbound, etc., with the prospect via email, LinkedIn, and calling. And one of the things that AI SDRs are not really good at because of the legislation is an AI SDR cannot call their prospect, for example, in markets like the US. So what an AI SDR can do, meaning crafting a unique message or email, having a proper conversation with the prospect and actually booking a meeting, that can be only done through an email channel. So these are really the 2 channels where it does work. So but that means, if you're kind of constrained to these 2 channels, you can't be doing sort of social selling, maybe other things that an SDR does. That really means that there is a constraint in that sense. So think of it, essentially as a piece of software. It's like ChatGPT, it does essentially certain things based on the input that you provide into the software, and then the outcome or the benefit that you get out of that is essentially at the end of the day, meetings booked for your business.
So that's one way, especially SaaS companies that you mentioned can scale quicker than usual. Because I mean, getting a good salesperson on board, filtering through tons of potential leads is a soul destroying activity. So from my SaaS background as well, I can think a lot about, oh man, I wish this. Okay, so I just want to get SDRs out the way quickly. And I want to go a little bit more into your background because I think this is going to be quite interesting for folks as well. I want to touch on one thing, which is that you and I think your team won the video sales team of 2021 by Vidyard.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who's been doing sales and outreach, Vidyard and video marketing is underutilized and is super effective. And what I love about your website is when you open up the website, instead of just a boring old chatbot coming up, there is a young person waving at you, inviting you to engage with them. There is AI, but it's personalizing this AI approach, which I really love. So for anyone, I'm just going to say you need to go to Salesforge.ai and check out the site. It's beautiful, by the way. I love it. So
Thank
I
you.
might steal some ideas from your website. But I want to go back into your background. You've got experience at Google, at a variety of other places. I loved one of your titles, which was Chief Bacon Officer. I think I'm going to steal that. So you probably also speak a little bit of Chinese, a bit of German, obviously English, and I see you've got some experience in India as well. So you've really been around the world, experienced things. How did you start out? Was being a salesman what you dreamt of from when you were young?
Well, I don't think anybody who is in sales has dreamt of being a salesman. You kind of land in sales in one of the different paths. So I'll tell you kind of my journey, how that happened. So yes, I got educated in politics, essentially, international relations, security. And I always thought I'm going to work for like NATO, European Commission, whatever, doing the good thing and work in the public sector. And I did work for the European Commission for like a few months. And then I realized the type of people that work in those organizations, and they're not there to really what I call move the needle when it comes to society. And that's not the type of people I could really get along with. I'm typically the person that likes to get stuff done. And that can unfortunately only happen in the private sector. And so I understood that really I cannot imagine myself working in the public sector ever again. So then I did start my career at Google, and it was really what I call the digital academy. You're really upping your game in all things digital, on conversion rates, how advertising works, how businesses scale, etc. And that was really for me and kind of jump started my career in the world of tech. Now, Google is great, etc., but unfortunately, Google is like a corporate, like a bunch of other companies like corporates, so like Microsoft, etc. And you always felt like you're not really making an impact. So what happened essentially over the years, I always joined companies that were smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and then I ended up essentially starting my own company. But then I really joined the world of what's called SaaS, right? So software as a service. And in SaaS, everything has to move fast and then things have to grow, etc. There is a particular model and particular metrics that you kind of really get sort of used to very fast. And that's something that I really enjoyed. And this is why I stuck in SaaS for a very long time. But especially in the early days, so I was always sort of, in account manager and sort of support roles a lot. And the reason why I was in these roles is because my sort of superhuman power is really talking to people and getting my message across, etc. And I really started doing that in account management a lot more. So what's called customer success and making sure my customers are very successful. But then at one point in London, when I was working for a company called Black Crow, in that particular company, we used to sell machine learning. And when I joined that company, in the first few months, my managing director said to me, like, listen, you're not an account manager. You are like a sales machine. Like, you should be definitely working in sales. You're doing the wrong job. And I'm like, well, I just really like to talk to people. And for me, it didn't matter. And yeah, there was this sort of, back in your mind, like working in sales, then there's commission, there's targets, and et cetera, et cetera. But he was like, how about you try for a quarter? And then I understood I was getting this sort of dopamine hit and sort of converting prospects into customers. And the paycheck that you were getting in terms of commission, etc., the sort of net home take pay, when you were getting that over the next 3 months, you never looked back to being an account manager ever again. So you're getting more dopamine hit, you're getting more money. It was super obvious that I should be in that particular role. So from then on, I stayed in sales for the rest of my life. And I was always typically the top contributor in the team. That means I carried the most pipeline. I was closing the most deals for the companies. And then eventually I landed in the role of being a VP sales, leading a sales team of 50. Now, I was leading a sales team of 50 during the times when it was all about growth at all costs. We had to grow. And when you were looking at the numbers that we had to hit and the conversion rates that we had in our Excel sheet, then we're looking at how many humans do we actually need to hit that, being essentially efficient. And so having this sales team of 50, this is where I sort of had my epiphany moment that, hey, listen, we can attain our pipeline targets and our revenue targets in a very different way that doesn't require all these humans. So with the very similar levels in that kind of small sort of seed startup that I was in, and I had a huge team. Today, I have a sales team of 3 achieving similar results. Now imagine back in the days, 50 people, and then suddenly you have 3. There's a lot of things that have changed in the last sort of 3-4 years. And so essentially efficiency is what you get rewarded today a lot more. Generally speaking, a lot of company founders, CEOs, etc., they really don't want to hire a lot of people today. Generally, just across sales and different functions, you want to be lean and mean. And the metric that people typically look at today, the smartest founders in the world, is looking at revenue per employee. Naturally, to achieve that, you need to do things in a particular way. The founders, by default, when they're looking to keep the headcount low, they're looking at ways of essentially not hiring people. So when they have a problem, they don't think about essentially hiring a human to solve that problem. They, by default, thinking about, can an AI agent solve that problem? Can a piece of automation solve that problem, etc. And I think a lot more founders are getting more used to essentially not hiring humans to solve the problems due to how technology has advanced, due to OpenAI, whatever, like, for example, what we use, n8n.com. There's also softwares like make.com. Essentially, these are sort of softwares that help you to automate different parts of the business to help you reduce the pressure on hiring more people. So for example, this year we have a goal to introduce 1,000 NAN flows within our business that would reduce the pressure to hire more people, right? We want to be very lean, very mean. We don't want to be hiring people too much, because otherwise what will end up happening, you're going to do layoffs. We don't want to ever do layoffs. So to never do layoffs, don't overhire, keep your business lean and mean, and only hire those individuals that do move the needle, and it cannot be automated, right? So I think this is really the smart way of doing things. And I think a lot of companies will be shifting sort of into this sort of, mindset.
You talk about new startups or businesses wanting to, not hire as many people and go the AI route. But a lot of the leaders in these organizations are getting on a bit or are not necessarily young. So your target market is basically capped at young people who are accepting AI. How are you getting some of the more legacy or older businesses to start thinking in this way? Because you've got a product that is going to potentially reduce headcount, be a huge saving for the organization. But AI is scary. Here comes this company saying, I'm going to save costs, I'm going to increase your revenue without increasing headcount. But I've never done this before. Where's the textbook? Where are the Stanford graduates, or where are the INSEAD graduates coming with their degrees on AI, corporate restructuring? How does that conversation start?
Now, if you're talking to a business, I'm going to give you an example with the US, right? So if you're talking to a business in the US, you always want to be on top of your game in the US, which is less so the case in Europe. In the US, everybody knows they have competition breathing down their necks. And yes, it could be, let's say, individual in your 40s, 50s, 60s, and you're like, what's this AI? What's this new thing? Is this like another like Bitcoin or whatever? What is this trend? Should I be ignoring this, etc.? And unlike Bitcoin, whatever, crypto, whatever, you're not ignoring AI, because what happens is if your competitors are introducing AI and the capabilities and the efficiency levels, and you're not introducing because you don't believe in AI or you're lazy, ultimately your competitors will outcompete you eventually, right? you will be taken down. That's so Americans definitely, like if you talk about the US market, they're definitely conscious that they always want to be on top of the game. Now, that's not the case in Europe from my experience. And yes, Europe typically lags behind this sort of process of what is the sort of next best thing that we should be implementing to be always ahead of the competition, right? You don't have that muscle that you train. And I don't think that the technology vendor is the one that should be sort of coaching, teaching you about this. There's a bunch of consultants or a bunch of people internally that should be smart enough to understand that as you know the world evolves over time and as the new tech pops up like LLMs and AI agents, etc., if you don't introduce that, your competitors will. Why wouldn't they, right? To reduce headcount, maybe reduce prices for the customers, etc. You will be in trouble ultimately, right? So at the end of the day, it benefits the end user. It always benefits the end user. And whether the end user gets, a faster result, a better result, a cheaper software, or whatever the service that you're offering, why wouldn't they go for that particular, say, vendor, right? I don't really see a lot of businesses that are in the world of tech and not using essentially AI by default. And because there are so many different things that can be done, right, to kind of improve the efficiency levels, gross margins, or customer satisfaction, or et cetera, et cetera. So it's just that we work, the world that we live in, and you have to embrace the change. But unfortunately, it's not arguably for the technology vendor to maybe make that happen. It's for people that work internally in that organization or consultants that come into play. So they're definitely are the ones that should be sort of pushing the needle. And ultimately, the savings that you're making from introducing these capabilities are at least 6 to 7 figures of bottom line improvements to your business. So I gave you the example of, having 50 people sales team versus 3 people sales team. It's a huge amount of savings that you're generating, for business. And yes, these businesses are not like for like, but having a savings on an annual basis of 6 to 7 figures is something that you definitely should be considering, right?
So now I can see why you're a good salesman, and I can see that you've pulled in the political, or the diplomatic side in terms of not telling people what to do, but letting them figure it out themselves. So, so that was a little masterclass from Frank. Earlier, let's go back to the startup side. You mentioned that you've gone from large businesses to smaller and smaller businesses until you started your own business. What was the point where you said, that's it, I have to do this myself? I can't be giving this ARR to other people. I can do it myself. Just take me through that process of what gave you the confidence or the courage to start this yourself.
So my really, let's call it proper first office job after working at the European Commission was really working at Google, right? So it's a big org, 10,000 people, and there's a lot of red tape at Google. Even though Google preaches that it's more like a startup, etc., still there's a huge amount of red tape in there. Now, Google hires a lot of ambitious people that wants to move fast, make an impact, and move forward. But Google's a machine. So very ambitious people typically leave Google and they actually go to smaller companies to make a bigger impact. And then I was sort of downsizing because ultimately in the smaller companies you make bigger impact. And then you take on more responsibility, whether it's as a VP sales, having a sales team of 50, etc. And I think, when I left my last gig as a VP sales of a sales team of 50, at that particular point, I had two choices. One is to become again a sales of a very fantastic software company, and they would pay me something like over 200K to be with them. It's a lot of money, and you could be very comfortable, right? For a long time, and they're doing really well. Or option two is what else could I do in my life? I'm an individual that's always trying to think, how can I up my game? And to up your game, you always have to be in a zone of where you're not comfortable, right? Where you're learning something new and it drives you. If you know how to sell a software and you're gonna become a head of sales, it's like repeating the same thing, right? I know how to sell stuff and how to convince people and whatever. But what really, when you can kind of think from, let's call it career progression or kind of progressing life, you should be definitely what's the next step in your lifetime. And for me, I always have to be sort of progressing and doing kind of more challenging things and more challenging things. And really, so if you're being really successful in sales, the next question kind of pops in your mind, okay, damn, I made so much money for these CEOs. And they're going to exit their companies eventually. Why wouldn't you just sell your own software? Right? What's stopping you from doing that? Especially if you're an individual that, wants to do things their own way. You have your own internal ego. So I definitely have my own ego. But also the other thing is like, hey, listen, I could run a business much better than that CEO that I used to work for. So if you have that itch internally, then you probably should be starting a startup, right? So, and then at the end of the day, unfortunately, when I was thinking back in my days, I was like, damn, but like 99% of startups do fail. Like, is this really a thing that I want to go ahead with, knowing that the probability of failure is so high? And I'm the person, because I'm a sales, I guess, is because I like to take risks, right? Because you believe in yourself. And the problem that you're going after, right? The assumed problem is something that drives you. Like, there's definitely a problem. And there's definitely nobody solving that problem the way that I want to solve. Like, essentially reducing the headcount in sales. And I essentially drew the experience from my years in sales. So, because what I'm doing right now is I'm essentially helping companies to generate a sales pipeline with the meetings, but with the least headcount possible. This is where I was always frustrated, essentially looking at, I guess, the individuals that I was working in the team or when I was hiring people. And I was always thinking about, damn, there's all these people in sales. They don't have to be there. They're not actually incremental for the company. They're not actually making what's called a bottom line impact for that business. They're making a top line impact, like revenue impact, but like they're not very, very good at their jobs, really. And the reason why, because they're not really good in sales is because, in my lifetime, I hired hundreds of salespeople and I fired hundreds of salespeople as well. Is that for every 10 salespeople that you hire, only one person is really what's called a natural. And that's maximum. One person, really, really natural. And they're going to do a really good job. And then after that, you have 2 or 3 salespeople that you could train up, really train up. They're very, very good at being coached, very, very good at delivering, and they're somewhat good as that individual who's natural. But then the rest of the people, like 60% in the business, is what I would typically describe as deadwood. And that's literally what it is. These individuals should not be in their job. They should not be in sales at all. It's just that they don't know what else to do with their lives. It doesn't matter, So they're not really incremental. They don't get what I would typically say the dopamine hit in their lives. They don't really enjoy closing or building pipeline. They really feel miserable internally, and that's why they not able to get to a level of, let's call, efficiency to really be accretive for the business. And that's fine. So if you know that there's what's called a human problem in sales, then you start thinking about, okay, so if only 40% of the labor in that particular organization, being the sales org, is really incremental for the business, how can I increase the output for those individuals? So I was always thinking to myself, damn, I was always really contributing to my team, and I was always like the top rep. And I wish there was a tech that could help me increase my output significantly. Like, we're talking about really moving the needle. And there was no tech that was doing that. And the reason why there was no tech that was really moving the needle in space is because back in the days, it was about whoever has the biggest sales team would make more money. So essentially the softwares were orchestrated in a way that they would charge per seat, and they would build these sort of workflows, etc., that would accommodate bigger teams. And bigger teams means you make more money. And I thought, like, why would you do that? Like, really, why wouldn't you have the least number of salespeople making a lot of, pipeline or revenue for you? Why wouldn't you want to do that? And that's just how, the legacy softwares have been built. So this is where I had sort of my own frustration, having 50 salespeople in an organization. I really, couldn't see a way how could I, run similar output levels with a lot of sales headcount. Why wouldn't you do that, right? Why wouldn't you, have leaner and meaner teams, like really crushing it? And so with that frustration, again, when I had these 2 options to be ahead of sales and earning a lot of money, or essentially starting a startup and being poor and earning nothing and being on benefits eventually, my wife hated me. She hated me for choosing the option 2, going for the startup. She still hates me, I think. For the whole year, I was unemployed. I was earning no salary, nothing, because I really believed that there was this problem that needs to be solved, and it was big enough. Like one of the mistakes that the founders make is they go after problems that are just not painful enough, not big enough. There's not big enough market. The Americans will never buy it. The reason why I mentioned the Americans is because you can never make it big unless you kind of solve the problems also for the Americans as the first and primary market. Unfortunately, the markets in Europe are not big enough for many different things that can be done. So the likelihood of kind of going big, going fast, and kind of really making it is just too low in Europe. So my always advice is like when you're looking to solve a problem, try and solve the problem for the Americans first. And I know it sounds weird, but try and solve it for them first. The likelihood of you being successful, you making it, and you making it big out of Europe is much higher than you trying to figure out how do I solve the problems for the Germans, for the Brits, and for the French. Trust me, it's not worth it to solve it for them.
America
That's worth
first,
it to solve
baby.
it for the
Yeah.
Americans.
Well, it's a very fascinating sort of route that you've taken. And I think the benefit that you obviously bring to this organization is that you've been in that role and you know what the challenges are, and you can go and talk directly to your customer about that because you know what the problem is. And as you said, it's solving a real problem. So not finding a problem to solve. There's the problem. You're stubbing your toe over it all the time, and let's go and deal with that. Now, moving from being an employee to becoming an employer, how has that changed your mindset of those CEOs that you've seen in the past where you thought you could do it better than them?
So that's not a good question. By the way, I like your questions. They're definitely very challenging to answer. So when you turn the tables, right? So when you're like, okay, I'm not an employee anymore. Now I'm a CEO. And really the main job of a CEO or the C-level, it doesn't matter, founders, is to really hire people that are better than you. Really, that's really the main job. And it's a very hard job because I'm struggling to really find people that are better than me or people that are somewhat good as me. Finding really good people is really hard in maybe tech or it doesn't matter, companies that grow really fast. And that is actually more of a challenge in Europe than in the US. And the reason for that is in the US, there's the, let's call the American dream. People know they want to make it, right? They make it big. They want to get equity. And with equity, meaning stock options, once the company exits, everybody gets essentially filthy rich. So everybody wants to get filthy rich in the US. Now, these things don't happen in Europe as much. So people are not used to the idea and the dream of being filthy rich. They have never experienced that, don't know any friends locally in any of the markets. So it's very difficult to imagine the state of being filthy rich and being in the mind of really pushing what I would call rowing towards particular goals. And then over the years, you get to a stage where, damn, we're already making like 10 million, 100 million a year. Super difficult to get people in that mindset. People are in the mindset typically of, when you leave the university, like, I gotta work at a big firm, the Siemens or whatever, at Microsoft, I gotta work there for a long time. But in the US, you also have a bunch of really cool startups that you can join, and people really want to make in those startups. And you just don't have that culture and the mindset and the grind and the willingness and the hunger to really. And this is why Europe is really struggling on the front of having really big businesses that really make it. I think it's the ambition and the mindset that's really the struggle. We are, for example, we're based in Europe, right? We definitely want to hire people in Europe. There's a good engineering talent in particular, and we're product engineering led, so there's a lot of great talent. But also the engineers we hire, even though they're very talented, that's one thing. But the other thing is like you need to ship fast. So in our case, when we do interviews, is we always say, hey, do you imagine shipping features on a daily basis? Not on a weekly basis, not on a monthly basis, but you will need to ship daily. And then there's typically two responses. Either people embrace, wow, shipping daily? I want to ship daily. I definitely want to ship daily. I never understood why these companies are so slow, right? That's the one response. And then the other response is like, what? Are you crazy? Shipping daily? And then you know how the interview then goes, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But typically to hire one really good engineer at the Forge, it means for us to do 30 interviews. I feel like back in my Google days, to find really good candidate for Google, so I used to do interviews, you had to, interview quite a few people. And it's kind of very similar in our case, but that's because, I always typically say in the interview process, like, hey, listen, there's the corporates, that you can work for. There's the government, the public sector that you can work for. You can work for a startup, for example. And then we're like the top 1% startup that moves like really fast. So we need a particular type of people that are really love to work in a place where things literally change daily, weekly. A lot of people cannot keep up with the change, and that's fine, right? And this is why you disqualify, etc. But we really need people that do work really well and they roll together very fast towards particular milestones, and they love to achieve the targets. And that's, I think, really as an employer to find these people that want to be somewhat in a similar mindset. They don't have to be as crazy as me, but at least building a team that rows fast, right? Like a rowing club. There's a movie, by the way, I highly recommend watching. To row fast and getting to milestones and getting these, multiple individuals, and we have right now 30 plus for all of them to kind of think fast, do fast. That's really a big challenge. It's like a needle in a haystack, really, in the early days. Of course, later you can find, people maybe that are not as good, but also in our case, so let's say we have these 30 plus employees right now in the company, but we don't have actually any like mid-management layer. So there's 3 co-founders right now in the business, and we have 30 plus employees, and there's no management layer in there. So what I want to say with this is that the reason why we're able to be so successful, and we're going to do it until 50 employees roughly, is that we hire what I would typically say autonomous humans. Or the other way to look at it is essentially you hire adults, but you don't hire children. And when you hire adults and you don't hire children, you don't have to babysit them. You don't. It's not like, where I go into Slack or into Office, we also have Office, where a person says, I don't know what I need to do. I don't know what's the next step, etc. It should be obvious to you what you should be doing in an organization. I'm not there to like really babysit you. So we give you, what we call the North Star, the KPI that you're just going towards. I just give you a monthly target, but really kind of you should be autonomously pushing yourself to achieve that. If you need help, you ask for help, etc. It's like super important that you should be hiring these adults, but definitely don't hire children, because these children is what's dragging you down, which is the reason why you're kind of slower and slower, because you have to be teaching them, etc. And another example would be, essentially what an adult would do is, like, let's say you join a company, and yes, they would go through an onboarding file that you provide them. They go through onboarding, they would watch the videos, etc. But they would be also curious, and they would ask these questions to try to make sure that they get how things are done in the company and what they need to do, etc. They will ask really good questions, right? It's not silly question, but really good question. Silly question is also fine, by the way, but they're really curious to want to get ramped, and essentially they do what's called self-onboarding. They're really hungry to get to a state where they get a lot of the things that other people already know about. And that's already the first sign. What is a really bad sign when you hire an individual is you hire them, they're bored, and then you ask them baseline questions, what you would expect of post onboarding, and they don't know anything about that.
Hmm.
By the way, we also have been letting go a lot of people in this organization. But when we do hire people, we hire them what we call an 80-20 basis into the company. We have this probation period of 33 months, and we're really trying to understand whether they're a good fit for the business, the team, etc. And the way we do that, which is maybe unique to us, or at least I have never heard any company doing that, but you have this 3 months probation period, and by default, every person does not pass probation. Unlike the rest of the companies where you join a company, the default expectation is you pass probation. Not in our case. In our case, you do not pass probation when you join the company in 3 months. So by default, you will leave the business. And what we do as a leadership team of 4 individuals is we build a business case to make you pass the probation. We're trying to figure out, like, we build that case over time, right? A conviction that you're really a strong asset for us, for the team, for the business, and you're going to make what we call really good damage to the business. You're going to really contribute for this company, right? So it really needs to happen. So everybody has to be in agreement that this individual is definitely what's called a must-have organization. And by doing so, this is what allowed us to keep what we call a really high caliber of individuals in the company. And when you work in this sort of environment that everybody's contributing, everybody's an A player, right? So this is the sort of thing that we've done. And there's maybe other ways to do that, but we thought that for us, that's really works really well. So yeah.
So some interesting insights there into how you are moving into a new generation of business leader. And again, using all of these AI tools and AI processes, you are actually practicing what you preach. You're not saying customers do this and we do something else. So I think that is a good case study in itself, just explaining how you operate and how you run your business. And I'm sure a lot of businesses would be quite jealous of your process, because I'm sure they would like to get rid of deadwood as well. I would love to chat to you again once you get to 50 people, because that's, again, that magic number of 50, the startup phase, exciting. Everyone is on board with the goal, and everyone's a new girlfriend. Everything is new and exciting. And then you need to get HR and an office manager and a this and a that. And then, so I'd love to see how, when you get to that stage, what you're going to be doing. So that's going to be exciting for our next chat. We could chat for ages and ages on a whole bunch of these things, but I'm going to leave this for a round 2 once you get to that 50 mark. I just want to talk about one last thing, which is getting to $3 million in revenue for any business is quite significant, and especially for a SaaS business that is starting up. I think we'll, in our next session, maybe chat about, how have you gotten to that? And I would really recommend that people go and take a look at Salesforge. We haven't even spoken about the business that much, but I really enjoy hearing your thinking about new ways of structuring businesses, bringing in your sales ethos into these organizations. And I'm sure that the clients that you go and sell to also sort of get inspiration from you a little bit in terms of, hey, this guy's doing something different. I can learn from them. So yeah, I mean, we really could go on and on. So I'm going to stop it here. Otherwise, I'm going to bore the listeners with my voice. But Frank, it's been so exciting chatting to you. If folks have got questions, please put it in the comments so that we can ask Frank. And Frank, where can I send them to learn a bit more about you and Salesforge?
I mean, if you got any questions, feel free to, ping me on LinkedIn. It's a very typical place to find me and a lot of other people. And yeah, just feel free to connect. And if you want to find out what we do and why we grow so fast, check out Salesforge.ai. There's a bunch of widgets that you mentioned and many other things that we do. Yes, it's a cool site. We have a really cool guy working on the website. And feel free to reach out. And if you have any particular question to help you out, feel free to do so.
And for anyone who wants to see what a really good LinkedIn personal profile looks like, you've got to check out Frank's profile. He's done everything on it and it looks real good. So Frank, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll chat soon.
Chat soon. Thank you.
I really do appreciate your comments. So why not go and watch this live on YouTube, or go to my website, kuhne.no. That's kuhne.no for more information.